Yes, maybe not the most controversial title for a rugby video, but today I want to talk about where the Premiership is definitely worse than the URC and the top 14 at the moment, disregarding maybe the obvious of, the salary cap and also quality of players, etc. Let's get into it. So, the first 2 weeks, I felt like we've had some exciting games, some non-exciting games. Out of the 10 games that have been played, 4 have been one score, which is a pretty good percentage. So that's like 40% of the games. It's literally exactly 40% of the games. But I still feel like that even with these games that are close, they're just riddled with mistakes. They're riddled with rugby that's not exactly amazing. Some of it is. Christian Wade and the Bristol game last week, I think, was magnificent. But I watched this and then I watched the URC, and I haven't started watching the top 14 yet, but I can probably tell without even looking at it that the quality of the Premiership is it's just less than it is of these other two domestic leagues. And there's a few reasons for this. First of all, I think it's obvious to say and obvious to see that some of the best players have been nabbed and they've gone to other leagues. Thinking Jack Willis, Lewis Ludlam as well this year. There's been a bunch of players that were English, homegrown talents that have moved abroad, and money is probably a big part of it. Obviously, there are other aspects. You don't want to just nail it down to just money. Obviously, probably living in France is, probably pretty cool. On top of that, you also get to learn a different culture. But if you think that your England career is over or it's limited, then you're probably more than willing to go over to a French team, earn a bit more money, and close out your career and get your money when you can. And I've got no problem with that whatsoever. I think it's natural, it's normal for players to do this, to prioritise their own personal security and safety in terms of their financials, rather than pursuing an England career that is either at the end of it, for example, like players like Manu Tuolangi, or they think they're just not going to get a look in, like Harry Arndell. And then there's Jack Willis, who probably should be picked regardless of him playing in France, and there should be an exception, but we're not making those exceptions. So I think this is a factor in why the Premiership is declining in its quality compared to these other leagues. I will also say as well, I think the fact that we're having 10 teams not only adds to this factor, but it creates another factor as well. Just keeping it on that point, having only 10 teams means every week there's only 150 starting places for professional players. Yes, there's the championship, but you can't get paid a decent salary at the championship. So you only have 150 starting places every week for players. This means it's limited. It can bottleneck talent coming through. Yes, those players leaving is good, but it's also probably like a symptom that there's not enough space to go around as well. And it means that newer guys are coming in for really competitive spots. And maybe this should increase the quality, but because I think there's just such limitation in the amount of teams there are, and in terms of the quality of the teams as well, because of how the salary cap is programmed, aka you can have a marquee player and then everyone else has to fall in the salary cap. It just leads to probably like what we're seeing at the moment, where it's a bit of a transition year between getting better quality players that are homegrown talents, because at the moment the Premiership can't hold in that load of players that are of that high quality, because there's just not enough money to go around, right? There's 10 marquee players, 10 players in the entire Premiership that can be paid basically, theoretically, an unlimited salary. And that's it. There is no more. There used to be 12. I think maybe even 13. I can't count all the different clubs that have gone. Well, actually, I can. Wasps, London Irish and Worcester, right? So that's 13 there. So that's an extra 3 players that would be able to be within that system. And this fact that there's only 10 teams, I think, has another knock-on effect as well. I think last year we saw the peak of the Premiership in terms of why the 10 teams really worked out, and that's because it concentrated a lot of really good talent to make every week really competitive. And now that we've seen that all these players kind of leave in the last year or two, and it's not just English players, I'm looking at Leicester, and players like Jasper Wiese have now left as well to go and play elsewhere and earn a bit more money somewhere else. Now that this has happened, I feel like it's now destroyed whatever the middle class was within the Premiership. And I think you look at, the URC and you look at top 14, and with that amount of teams, there is allowable of like a middle class of teams. And it talks about it kind of binds into what I was talking about right at the beginning in terms of only 40% of the games were decided by one score or less. And if you don't have a middle class that are competing for each other, man, I feel like I'm going around in circles here, but let me try and give you an analogy. So do you think a full Leinster team versus a Benetton team would be an exciting game week on week? Probably not. Do you think a Benetton team versus... Now I'm trying to pick my team wisely here because there's a lot of up and downs in the URC at the moment. I'd probably go Ospreys. I know they just beat the Stormers, but I'd still classify them in that middle class. Do you think if there was more games like that per week, there would be more competitive games? Probably. And I think the Premiership is suffering from the fact that that middle class doesn't exist. I think we're still trying to work out who's in that upper class and who's in the lower class. I think Gloucester originally at the beginning of the year, I think they were probably in that lower class, but they're playing some really nice rugby. They're just going ham. Newcastle are obviously probably going to be finishing in that bottom spot. Obviously, nothing's anywhere near decided at the moment. It's initial looks. But one of the things that you can see is that because there is this no middle class, excuse me, you have a very limited set of games each week that you probably see are true competitors and true quality comes out. Speaking of true quality and true class, I think the refereeing is really suffering for Premiership and English rugby. I mean, compare this to other domestic leagues and the referees they have. Andre Piardi, great. I'm going to mess up all these names. Nika Amashukeli, the Georgian referee, great. Ben O'Keefe, great. You know, Chris Busby as well. I think he's been really, really great. Great referee. Who do the Premiership have? Tom Foley and Craig Maxwell Keys, and a few other referees like Carl Dixon that have been a bit suspect. I just feel like they're inconsistent, and I can see it in the first couple of game weeks that we've had with the Premiership. With the URC, everything feels like so defined, so clear. This is going to happen in the breakdown. You're going to be penalised for this, X, Y, and Z. With referees, I feel like in the Premiership, it almost feels like it's just a randomizer sometimes. Sometimes they'll just call things that they've just seen 60 minutes into a game and it's been happening 3 or 4 times. And all of a sudden they just want to decide like they want to call it. And I feel like in the URC, they really don't have that as much. I feel like the refereeing quality is much more than what we're seeing in the Premiership for sure. And I don't think I'm overstepping by saying that at all. So I feel like there is some hope in the future. And I feel like the hope is the fact that these younger guys are coming in. We're going to start having a promotion and relegation again. Thank God we're doing that. I mean, I think that was a really silly decision not to have that in the first place. The next thing they need to do is get rid of these silly rules in terms of you have to have an X-sized amount of stadium to be in the Premiership. Just get rid of that. Just have people come in. Because how is a Championship side going to have the money to afford to build a new stadium if they've only just come into the Premiership and they're getting the Premiership money? It makes no sense. Allow free-flowing teams in and out of the Premiership. Maybe in the future, add another 1 or 2 teams. Now that we've got this more homegrown talent being brought in that's of younger talent, but lesser quality because they've had less Premiership and professional rugby statuses and games, give them more time, let them flourish, bring in more players, open the pool slowly and widely. I hope this is what they do. I mean, you can only hope for the best at this point. It feels like this is the transition year where the Premiership is probably going to be of a lesser quality than it has been in previous years as we have those players leave and have new guys coming in. So, yeah, I would definitely rate the Premiership below the URC and the top 14 in terms of domestic leagues at the moment. The one thing I like about it, and I think maybe the top 14 is the only competitor in this, is the playoff format. I'm not a fan of 8 teams in the playoffs at the end. It feels like it's too elongated. It feels like there's not enough premium real estate value put on those playoff teams. I feel like that's something maybe that the URC needs to change. I like the top 14 system. It's kind of like that Championship playoff where you kind of earn your place for that final place to then go through. Really, really cool system. I like it. Still don't fully understand it, but it's cool. I do like that. I feel like you're trying to, throughout the year, create a feeling of scarcity for those final places in the playoff spots. And I feel like with 8 teams, I just don't feel like it does that at the moment. I think that's all I've got to say. Please leave your comments down below. And let me hear what you think. Oh, another thing as well. Do the whale, I mean, this gets talked about every year. It feels ridiculous. Putting the Welsh teams in, that's automatically another 3 or 4 teams straight into Premiership, widens the pool. I feel like they'll probably be more competitive in the Premiership, although, again, I say that with bated breath, considering where Cardiff and Swansea are right now in the URC. But let me know what you think. Please leave your comments. Let's have a discussion about this. I'll catch you in the next one.